The night Kwon Jae-ho was poisoned, 43 armed men stood in that building, and not one of them was enough. It was his youngest lieutenant who found him first, slumped against the wall of the private dining room, his glass tipped on its side, the wine spreading across the white marble floor like something final. They locked the building down in under 2 minutes. They cleared every exit. They had protocols for this. They had trained for exactly this. They had guns and radios and a private doctor on retainer, and the kind of loyalty that money and fear builds over a decade. And still, by the time the doctor arrived, Kwon Jae-ho's pulse was already doing something that made the doctor's face go very still. Nobody noticed the little girl. She had come in through the kitchen with the catering staff. 7 years old. Braids just slightly loose on the left side the way they always were by evening. She was not supposed to be anywhere near that room. She was not supposed to be in that building at all. But children have a way of being exactly where they are not supposed to be, and Nia had slipped away from the kitchen the way children slip away when adults are too busy being frightened to watch them. She found him on the floor. She did not scream. She did not run. She did not do any of the things that 43 trained men had failed to do in time. She simply sat down beside him, took his hand in both of hers, and did something so small and so precise that the doctor stopped mid-sentence when he heard it. What she said in that moment should not have been enough to save the most dangerous man in Seoul. It was. Later there would be arguments about the timeline, about the antidote, about what exactly had turned the situation around in those final minutes. His head of security would have his version. The doctor would have his. The reports would be filed and the explanations would be neat and professional and technically supportable. But every single man in that room would quietly know the truth. That Kwon Jae-ho, the man no enemy had ever been able to finish, had been pulled back from the edge by a 7-year-old girl with loose braids and eyes that did not know how to panic. And in the chaos that followed, before anyone thought to ask her name, before anyone thought to find her mother, the catering staff was moved out quickly through the side exit. All of them, including one woman who had not breathed properly in 20 minutes, who had spent the entire time pressed against a kitchen wall with her eyes closed and her fists clenched, and her whole body praying a prayer she did not have words for. Because Adiz had not survived 4 years of hiding by being careless. But she had raised a daughter who noticed everything. And tonight, in 40 impossible seconds on a marble floor, that daughter had just made them both impossible to forget. If this opening already has your heart racing, you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Like this video, subscribe to Cross-World Romance Stories, and drop the word Nia in the comments right now because this story is only getting started and you do not want to miss a single second of what comes next. Adiz did not sleep that night. She lay on the narrow bed in their small apartment in Mapogu, staring at the ceiling with the particular stillness of a woman running calculations in her head. Nia was asleep beside her, one arm thrown over her stomach the way she had slept since she was 3 years old, her breathing slow and even and entirely unbothered by what had happened. Children recovered like that. They did something enormous and then slept through the night as if the world had not just shifted on its axis. Adiz had not slept properly in 4 years. She thought about the man on the floor. She had not seen his face. She had been too careful for that, pressed into the corner of the kitchen with her back to the door, but she had heard the name pass between the men in urgent, clipped tones. Kwon Jae-ho. She had heard that name before. Everyone in Seoul who moved in the kinds of circles she had once been forced to move in had heard that name. It sat in conversations the way certain names sit. Not loudly, not often, but with weight. She had not known it was his building when she took the catering job. That was what she told herself in the dark. That it was coincidence. That Seoul was a large city and she had been careful, and this was simply bad luck arriving in the specific shape it always arrived. Unexpected and through the back door. She almost believed it. By morning she had made 3 decisions. She would not take any more catering jobs in that district. She would find new work by the end of the week. And she would not think about the name Kwon Jae-ho again. She made it 4 days before the black car appeared outside Nia's school. It was a Tuesday. Adiz was waiting at the gate the way she always waited, a few minutes early, standing slightly apart from the other parents, her bag on her shoulder, and her eyes doing the quiet work they always did, reading the street, reading the people, reading the space between things. She had learned to read spaces like that a long time ago. It had kept them alive. The car was too still. That was the first thing. Most cars that parked on that street had somewhere to be. This one had already arrived. She did not move. She did not reach for her phone. She stood exactly where she was and watched the school gate and waited for Nia and told herself she was imagining things. The window came down. The man who looked out was not Kwon Jae-ho. He was younger, sharp-faced, with the kind of careful blankness that people wore when they had been trained to show nothing. He looked at her directly. He did not smile. He said nothing. He simply looked at her the way someone looks when they want you to understand that they already know exactly who you are. The window went back up. Nia came through the gate 30 seconds later, braids slightly loose on the left side, backpack bouncing. Already talking before she reached her mother. Adiz took her hand, squeezed it once, kept her pace exactly normal all the way to the corner, and then turned left instead of right toward home, and did not stop walking for 6 blocks. That evening, she called the only person in Seoul she trusted with anything close to the truth. Her friend Somi, who asked no questions and lent her a phone that could not be traced, and said only, "Whatever it is, be careful," and then hung up. Adiz sat in her kitchen with the borrowed phone and thought about her options. There were not many. The following morning, Kwon Jae-ho's personal assistant called the number Adiz had listed with the catering agency. The voice was polite and precise. Mr. Kwon would like to thank the staff personally for their service the evening of the incident. There was a small gathering at his private residence this Saturday. Attendance was entirely voluntary. Adiz knew what voluntary meant when Kwon Jae-ho said it. She also knew that refusing would raise questions she could not afford to answer. So she said yes in a voice she kept very steady and spent the next 3 days preparing for the worst version of Saturday she could imagine. She did not bring Nia. She left her with Somi and kissed her forehead twice and told her to be good and walked out of the apartment without looking back, because looking back was not something she allowed herself when she was frightened. The residence was not what she expected. She did not know exactly what she expected. Something that announced power in the way powerful men usually announced it. Cold surfaces, sharp edges. The kind of architecture that reminded everyone who walked through it that they were smaller than the man who owned it. But the house that the cars pulled up to was set back from the road behind old trees, and its lights were warm, and the entrance hall smelled faintly of cedar wood, and something she could not immediately name. She was the last catering staff member to arrive. There were 6 of them standing in a reception room off the main hall, and they looked exactly the way people look when they have been told something is voluntary and understood that it was not. Nervous and trying not to show it. Adiz stood near the door and kept her expression professional and her breathing deliberate. Kwon Jae-ho walked in 12 minutes later. She had prepared for this. She had told herself she was prepared for this. She had constructed in her mind a version of this moment in which she looked at him and felt nothing except the careful distance she had spent 4 years perfecting. She had the distance ready. She had the blankness ready. She had everything ready. He walked in, and none of it was enough. He was taller than the men around him. Not dramatically so, but enough that the room rearranged itself slightly when he entered, the way rooms do around people who have never had to ask for space. He wore a dark suit with no tie, the collar of his shirt open one button, and he moved with the particular economy of a man who had long ago stopped wasting anything, including motion. There was a stillness to him that should have read as cold, and instead read as concentrated, as if the full weight of his attention was a thing with texture, and he had simply not pointed it at you yet. He thanked the staff. He was brief and genuine, and said nothing that was not meant. He shook hands with each person. When he reached Adiz, he paused. Not long. Half a second, maybe less. The kind of pause that other people in the room would not have noticed. Adiz noticed. His eyes were dark and very direct, and they stayed on her face for exactly long enough to confirm something he had apparently already decided. "Thank you for your work that evening," he said. His voice was low and even. She told him he was welcome and kept her eyes steady and her hands still and her face showing precisely nothing. He moved on. But as the staff were being escorted out 20 minutes later, the sharp-faced young man from the car appeared at her elbow. "Mr. Kwon would like a word," he said quietly. Separately. And there it was. She followed him down a corridor and into a room that was clearly a study, walls of books, a desk with nothing unnecessary on it, 2 chairs that faced each other across a low table. Jae-ho was already there, standing by the window. He did not sit when she entered. Neither did she. He looked at her for a moment, and then he said, "Your daughter, the one who was in the building that night." Adiz said nothing. She was in a room she was not supposed to be in, he continued. His tone was not accusatory. It was simply factual, the way he seemed to say most things. She found me before my men did. She said something to the doctor that changed the direction of his treatment. He paused. I would like to thank her. Adi's voice came out level. She is 7. She does not need to be involved in anything connected to that evening. I agree, Jeho said. And something in the directness of it caught her off guard because she had been prepared for resistance, and he had offered none. I am not asking to involve her. I am asking to thank her. There is a difference. The room was quiet for a moment. Adiz looked at him. He looked back, and something moved between them in that silence. Not quite recognition, not quite electricity, something older and more complicated than both. The specific discomfort of two people who are pretending they are strangers when some part of them already knows better. I will think about it, she said finally. He nodded once. That is all I am asking. She walked out of that house telling herself it was a simple thing. A man wanting to thank a child. Nothing more. She told herself that all the way home. She was still telling herself that when she got into bed that night and lay staring at the ceiling with Nia breathing slowly beside her and the city quiet outside, and the name Kwon Jae-ho sitting in the room like something that had moved in without asking. If you are feeling that tension between them and you know something is coming that neither of them is ready for, comment the word dangerous below and make sure you have subscribed because this story is about to go somewhere nobody is going to see coming. The following week arrived the way weeks arrive when you are trying to be careful. Ordinary on the surface, loaded underneath. Adiz went to work, picked up Nia from school, cooked dinner, helped with homework, and told herself she was fine. She was building a case for fine. She was assembling the evidence daily. Then Nia asked about the man. They were eating dinner on a Thursday, rice and stew that Adiz had made the way her mother made it. The smell of it filling the small kitchen the way it always did, and Nia looked up from her plate with the expression she wore when she had been thinking about something for longer than she had let on. Mama, she said, the man I sat with, the one on the floor, is he okay? Adiz set her spoon down. She looked at her daughter. He is fine, she said carefully. How do you know about that? Nia shrugged the way 7-year-olds shrug when they know more than you wish they did. I heard the men talking that night. They were scared. She paused. He didn't smell right. Adiz went very still. What do you mean? His breath. It smelled like something from Grandma's old medicine cabinet. The one with the bitter things. The ones she said you should never mix with food. Adiz's mother had been an herbalist in Enugu. She had kept a cabinet full of things with specific smells and specific purposes, and she had taught Adiz every single one of them the way women in their family pass things down, quietly and thoroughly, and without ceremony. And she had taught Nia the same way, sitting with her on weekend afternoons, letting her smell and touch and learn, because knowledge was the one thing you carried across every border. Nia had recognized the smell of the compound used in the poison. She had told the doctor, and the doctor had known exactly what to do. Adiz sat at that table for a long moment. Then she reached across and tucked a loose braid behind Nia's ear and said, yes. He is okay. You helped him. Nia nodded seriously. Good, she said, and went back to her rice. That night after Nia was asleep, Adiz sat in the kitchen with the lights low and let herself feel the full weight of what she had been avoiding. Nia had saved a man's life, a specific man's life, and that man wanted to find them. And Adiz had spent 4 years in this city building a careful, invisible life precisely so that a man from her past could not find them. Not Kwon Jae-ho, not him specifically, but the world he moved in, the world that had taken something from her and left her running. The question she had not asked herself yet, the one she had been refusing to ask, was whether Jae-ho knew. Whether the pause in the study had been more than assessment. Whether the directness in his eyes had been more than the directness of a powerful man who looked at everything the same way. Whether he had looked at Nia's age and done the arithmetic. She made herself stop there. She made herself get up and wash the dishes and go to bed. There was no evidence. There was no reason to assume. She had been careful. She had been so careful. She slept badly and woke early and made Nia's breakfast and sent her to school and then stood in her kitchen in the morning light and understood, quietly and with great clarity, that careful was no longer going to be enough. Jae-ho, that same morning, was sitting across from his head of intelligence, a man named Baek Juno who had been with him for 9 years and who could find anything given enough time and the right questions. I need everything on the catering staff from that evening, Jae-ho said. Juno nodded and started to rise. Jae-ho added, one of them specifically. He paused. She has a daughter. 7 years old. West African. He paused again. The girl has been in Seoul for at least 7 years based on her school. Juno sat back down. That last detail, he said carefully. Find it, Jae-ho said. His voice was flat and final the way it was when something had moved from possibility into certainty in his mind, and he was simply waiting for the facts to catch up. Juno found it by Thursday. He placed a single folder on Jae-ho's desk, without comment, and stood near the door while Jae-ho opened it. The photograph was from the school's parent registration files. Adesobi, Nigerian national, arrived in Seoul 7 years and 4 months ago on a student visa that had since been converted. Clean record. Quiet life. A woman who had worked hard to leave no edges for anyone to catch hold of. Jae-ho looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he turned to the second page. Nia Obi. Date of birth. He looked at the date, and something in his chest did something he had not felt in a very long time. Something that was not quite pain and not quite recognition, but lived in the space directly between them. He closed the folder. He sat with it closed in front of him for a full minute. Juno, he said finally without looking up. I need you to step out. Juno stepped out and closed the door without a word. Jae-ho sat alone in his office with the closed folder in front of him, and outside the city of Seoul carried on with its ordinary noise, and inside that room something that had been sealed for 8 years cracked open along a line that had always been there. He had known an Adiz once. 8 years ago, briefly and completely, and in the way that certain things are brief and complete at the same time. The way a fire is brief, but leaves the ground changed. She had been a graduate student. He had been already becoming what he was now. They had found each other in the overlap of 2 worlds that were never supposed to touch, and for 4 months something had existed between them that he had not had a name for then, and still did not have a name for now. And then she had left. No warning. No explanation that fully held together. A note that said things he had read so many times the paper had softened at the folds. Things about safety and choices and being sorry in a way that sounded like she meant it and still did not stay. He had looked for her. Briefly. Then his world had demanded all of him, and he had buried it the way he buried things, deep and thoroughly, and without ceremony. He reached out and opened the folder again. He looked at the date of Nia's birth one more time. Then he picked up his phone and called a number he had not called in 4 years. A woman named Dr. Song who asked no questions and kept records that did not exist in any official system, and who said simply, "What do you need? Tell me what a discreet paternity confirmation requires," he said. His voice was steady. The rest of him was not. You need to subscribe right now because what is coming next is going to change everything you think you know about this story. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling us what you think Adiz has been hiding, and keep watching because the next 60 seconds will leave you completely breathless. Adiz got the call on a Friday afternoon. Not from Jae-ho directly. From his personal assistant, the same polite, precise voice as before, informing her that Mr. Kwon had arranged a small private thank you for her daughter, entirely at her convenience, at a location of her choosing if she preferred, no obligation to attend his residence. The voice said entirely at her convenience in the particular tone of someone who has been instructed to say it and mean it. She almost said no. She had the word ready. It was sitting right there, clean and simple and final. She had used it before. She was good at it. But Nia had asked about him again that morning. Casually, the way she asked about most things, slipping it into breakfast conversation between asking about her homework and whether they could get a cat. "The man I helped," she said. "Did he send a thank you?" "Because Grandma always said you send a thank you." Adiz had looked at her daughter across the breakfast table and felt the specific helplessness of a mother whose child is right about something she wishes they were not right about. She said yes to the assistant. She chose a restaurant in Yongsan, public and well-lit and full of families on a Saturday afternoon. Neutral ground. She arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table near the window and sat with her back to the wall, and Nia, beside her drawing in a small notebook, and told herself this was simple. A thank you. 1 hour. Done. Jae-ho arrived exactly on time. He came in without a visible security presence, though she knew without looking that there were at least 2 men within range. He was dressed simply, dark coat, dark trousers, no performance to it. And he moved through the restaurant with that same quiet authority she had noticed before, the kind that did not require an entrance because the room simply adjusted. He saw Nia before he sat down, and something happened in his face. It was brief, controlled almost immediately. But Adiz had been watching for it, and she saw it, and the seeing of it sent a cold line of fear straight down her spine because it was not the look of a stranger seeing a child who had helped him. It was the look of a man recognizing something he had not been prepared to see. He composed himself in under 2 seconds. He sat down. He looked at Nia with a warmth that was genuine and said, "So you are the one who stayed." Nia looked up from her notebook and regarded him with the serious assessment she gave most new adults. "You were very sick," she told him. "I was," he agreed. "You smelled wrong," she said. "Most people do not smell like that unless they ate something bad. But this was different bad. My grandma had things that smelled like that. She used them for medicine." Jeho was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother was a doctor?" "A different kind," Nia said and looked back at her notebook. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the thing that lived just before a smile in a man who did not use them carelessly. He looked at Adiz then, directly, the way he had looked at her in the study, with that particular quality of attention that felt less like being looked at and more like being read. She held it. "Thank you," he said, "for letting her come." She nodded once. The hour passed in a way that felt nothing like an hour. Jeho spoke to Nia with the full weight of his attention, the way adults rarely spoke to children, not performing interest, but actually present, asking about the notebook, listening to the answers, following the threads she offered without condescension or impatience. Nia, who was cautious with new people in the same way her mother was cautious, opened up with a speed that made Adiz's chest ache with something she could not name. At one point Nia looked between them and said with the devastating directness of a 7-year-old, "You look at my mama the way Mr. Park in my class looks at the teacher he likes." The table went very quiet. Jeho set his tea down slowly. Adiz studied the surface of the table. A child at the next table dropped a spoon, and the clatter of it was the loudest sound in the world. "You are very observant," Jeho said to Nia. His voice was even. "I know," Nia said, and went back to her drawing. Later, outside the restaurant, while Nia stood a few feet away examining something on the pavement with intense focus, Jeho stood beside Adiz in the cool afternoon air and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I would like to see her again." Adiz looked straight ahead. "She is not something to be scheduled." "I know that," he said. "I am not asking to schedule anything. I am saying I would like to know her." He paused. "And I think you know why." The street was busy around them. People passing. The ordinary noise of a Saturday city. And Adiz stood in the middle of all of it and felt the thing she had been running from for 4 years arrive quietly and completely and without any drama at all. She looked at him. He looked back. "We are not doing this here," she said. He nodded. "When you are ready." She took Nia's hand and walked to the corner and did not look back and told herself she was still in control of this. She repeated it all the way home. She was still repeating it when she sat on the edge of the bath that evening while Nia splashed water and hummed to herself and Adiz held her own hands together and breathed and tried to remember what control had felt like before tonight. That night she took out the letter she had written 8 years ago and never sent. The second one. The one that said different things than the one she had left. The one that told the truth in full. She had kept it because throwing it away felt like a lie and sending it had never felt safe. And so it had lived in the bottom of her bag through 3 apartments and 2 countries and 4 years of Seoul. She read it. Then she folded it back up and put it away and understood that the time for letters had passed. The next morning Jeho called her directly. She did not know how he had her number and understood that asking would be pointless. He said only this: "I have questions I am not going to ask you yet because you are not ready to answer them. But I need you to know that whatever you decide, Nia will be safe. You both will be safe. That is not a negotiation. That is just what is true." The line was quiet for a moment. Adiz said, "You have no right to make promises about my daughter." "I know," he said, "but I am making them anyway." She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. Then she called Somi and said, "I think I made a mistake 8 years ago, and I think it has just caught up with me." And Somi, who had been waiting for this conversation for 4 years, said simply, "Tell me everything from the beginning." So Adiz told her. She told her about Seoul 8 years ago, about the graduate program and the conference where she had met a man she was told to stay away from and had not stayed away from. She told her about 4 months that had been the most alive she had ever felt and the most frightened. She told her about the night she had overheard a conversation not meant for her, about what certain people in Jaeho's world wanted to do to anyone he showed softness toward, about the specific credible threat delivered by a man whose name she had never forgotten. She told her about the decision she had made in a single terrible night, the note, the leaving, the discovery 3 weeks later in a clinic in Abuja that had rearranged everything. She told her about choosing to come back to Seoul not toward him, but because Seoul was where she had built the most, and because a city this large had seemed like enough distance. She had been wrong about that. Somi was quiet for a long time after. Then she said, "He doesn't know?" "No," Adiz said. "And now he suspects." "Yes. What are you going to do?" Adiz looked out the window at the street below. The same street. The same city. The same life she had built so carefully around the fact of this secret. "I don't know yet," she said. But something in her voice had changed, and Somi heard it, and said nothing, and simply stayed on the line, because sometimes that is all a person needs. Do not move from this video right now, because what Adiz decides next is going to break your heart before it puts it back together. Subscribe, drop a comment telling us whether you think she should tell him the truth, and keep watching because this story is nowhere near its most painful moment yet. 3 days later, Adiz's past arrived in a different shape entirely. She was coming out of the grocery near her apartment, Nia's hand in hers, 2 bags on her arm, an ordinary Tuesday evening, when she saw him. Not Jaeho, someone else. A man she had not seen in 8 years, but recognized in the first second the way you recognize a threat, with the body before the mind, a cold tightening in the chest, and a sudden specific awareness of exits. His name was Shin Woozing. He had worked for a man named Chairman O, the person who had delivered the threat that had sent her running 8 years ago. He was older now, heavier, but the eyes were the same, flat and patient, the eyes of a man who made his living waiting for exactly the right moment. He was looking directly at her. She kept walking. She did not change her pace. She did not grip Nia's hand any tighter than necessary. She walked to the corner and turned and kept walking and did not stop for 4 blocks, and then ducked into a small convenience store and stood in the back near the drinks refrigerators and breathed. Nia looked up at her. "Mama?" "Everything is fine," Adiz said. Her voice was entirely level. "Pick a juice." While Nia deliberated with great seriousness over 2 nearly identical juice boxes, Adiz stood in that bright, ordinary shop and understood that the timeline had just changed. Whatever she had been waiting for the right moment for, the right moment was now. Because Shin Woozing in her neighborhood meant Chairman O knew where she was. And Chairman O knowing where she was meant the reason she had run 8 years ago had not gone away. It had simply been patient. That evening she put Nia to bed early and sat at her kitchen table and did something she had not done since the night she left. She called the number. Jaeho's number. The one he had called her from. He answered on the second ring. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Not over the phone." He said, "When?" "Tomorrow," she said. "Just us." He said, "I will send a car." "No," she said. "I will come to you." There was a brief pause, and then he said, "All right." And the all right carried something in it. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. The sound of a man who had been waiting for a door to open and was now being very careful not to move too fast toward it. The next morning Somi came to stay with Nia, who was told only that Mama had an errand and who accepted this with the equanimity of a child who had learned that some of her mother's errands were things she was not yet old enough to be part of. Adiz took the train to Jaeho's residence. She had decided against a car because she needed the 40 minutes to finish building herself into the shape this conversation required. It was not enough time. Jaeho was waiting in the same study. The books, the desk, the 2 chairs. He was standing when she came in, and he did not sit until she sat. He poured tea without asking and set it in front of her, and then sat across from her and waited. She looked at him. He looked back. She said, 8 years ago, I overheard a conversation between 2 of Chairman O's men. They were talking about you, about the people connected to you, and what happened to them when O wanted leverage. There was a specific instruction about anyone you showed personal attachment to. The instruction was not vague. Jaeho's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. I left because of that, she said. Not because of you. Not because of anything you did. She paused. I need you to know that first. He said nothing. His hands were very still on the table. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after I left, she said. The room was absolutely silent. I came back to Seoul because it was the city I knew best, and because it was large enough that I thought I could disappear inside it. I did not come back toward you. She stopped. That is not entirely true. She looked at him directly because he deserved that. I came back because I wanted her to be somewhere close to the place where her father existed, even if she never knew him. Even if it was only geographical. I wanted her to breathe the same air as this city. Jae-ho stood up. He did not move toward her. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a long moment, and she let him have it because it was the least she owed him. When he turned around, his face had done something she had not seen on it before. It was not anger. It was not grief exactly. It was the expression of a man who has just received the answer to a question that has been sitting in the room for 8 years and is now very carefully deciding how to hold it. Why, he said. Why not tell me? Why not trust me to protect you both? Because I did not know yet if you could, she said. And by the time I understood the shape of what you had become, I had already built a life around the decision I made. She paused. And I was afraid that coming back to you meant pulling her into the exact danger I had taken her away from. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Shin Woozing. She looked at him sharply. He was in your neighborhood 2 days ago, Jae-ho said. I know. My people flagged it. I have been waiting to understand why before I moved. Adiz stared at him. I have had people watching your building since the night of the dinner, he said simply. Not intrusively. At a distance. I was not certain yet of what I was protecting. Now I am certain. The word protecting landed in the room and sat there. Adiz looked at this man she had left to save them both. This man whose daughter had sat on a restaurant floor and held his hand back from an edge she did not know the name of. This man who had built an empire out of the years she had spent hiding from the shadow of it. She said, What do you want to do? He said, I want to do what I should have been able to do 8 years ago. He looked at her with something that was direct and unguarded in a way she had not seen in him yet. I want to keep you both safe. I want to know my daughter. And I want the time to earn whatever else comes after that. Adiz sat with that. It was not a small thing he was asking for. It was not a simple thing. It was the kind of thing that required her to undo 4 years of architecture she had built carefully and live in the open without the walls she had gotten so used to she had started to mistake them for herself. I need to tell Nia, she said finally. He nodded. I need to do it in my own way. He nodded again. And she needs to want this, Adiz said. Whatever this is. She is 7. She is not a decision someone else makes. Something moved across Jae-ho's face. Respect. Clean and unqualified. She is already making her own decisions, he said. She made one that night that most adults would not have had the clarity to make. Adiz almost smiled. She did not quite. She stood and picked up her bag. He walked her to the door himself. Not to the front entrance, but to the side door she had come in through, the quieter way, and he held it open and she passed through, and he said her name once, just her name, Adiz, the way he used to say it 8 years ago, without anything attached to it except the weight of meaning it, and she stopped walking for half a second. Then she kept moving. She did not look back. But this time it was different. This time not looking back was not about survival. This time it was about knowing that the thing behind her was not danger, but a beginning, and that beginnings were not things you rushed toward. You walked toward them deliberately, with your eyes open, at a pace that let you mean it. This is the moment everything changes, and you need to be here for every second of what comes next. Like this video if Adiz's choice just hit you somewhere deep. Subscribe to Cross-World Romance Stories so you do not miss the next part, and drop in the comments whether you think Jae-ho deserves the chance she is about to give him. We read every single one. The following days moved with the specific weight of things that cannot be undone. Jae-ho moved against Shin Woozing quietly and completely. There were no confrontations, no visible action, simply a conversation between Jae-ho and the right people, followed by Shin Woozing leaving Seoul on a Wednesday morning flight to a city he had been given very good reasons to prefer. Chairman Oh, who was older now and whose empire had been quietly bleeding influence for 3 years, received a communication from Jae-ho's people that was brief and unambiguous. The woman and the child were under Kwon Jae-ho's personal protection. Anyone who moved toward them was moving toward him. The communication did not need to say more than that. It didn't. Adiz did not know the details of any of this. She knew only that the man who had been watching her building was gone, and that the particular quality of dread she had carried in her body for 4 years had eased slightly. Not gone. Not yet. But the volume of it had dropped in a way that left her slightly disoriented, The way you feel when a sound you have lived with so long you stopped noticing it finally stops. She told Nia on a Saturday morning. She sat her down at the kitchen table with the orange juice Nia liked and the particular morning light that came through their window between 9 and 10, and she told her in the simple, honest way she tried to tell her all things, carefully, but without lying about the shape of them. She said, "There is someone I knew before you were born. Someone important. He is the man from the restaurant. The one you helped." Nia listened. Adiz said, "He is your father." Nia was quiet for a moment. She looked at her juice. She looked at her mother. She looked at her juice again. Then she said, "I thought he looked at you funny for a reason." Adiz let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Is he nice?" Nia asked. "He is serious," Adiz said honestly. "But yes, he is nice in the ways that matter." Nia considered this with the seriousness of a child weighing something real. "Can I ask him questions?" "Yes," Adiz said. "You can ask him anything." Nia nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "And then, can we still get a cat?" Adiz covered her mouth with her hand. After a moment, she said, "We will discuss the cat separately." That afternoon, she sent Jeho a message. 3 words. "She is ready." He replied in under a minute. "So am I." The meeting happened in Jeho's garden, which Nia examined with intense approval before consenting to sit down at the outdoor table where tea and an array of snacks had been arranged with the kind of careful thought that told Adiz someone had asked questions about what a 7-year-old might like, and then taken it seriously. Jeho sat across from Nia. Nia looked at him with her full, considerable attention. "My mama said you are my father," she said. "Yes," Jeho said. "Why didn't you know about me before?" Jeho glanced briefly at Adiz, and then back to Nia. "Because your mother was protecting you," he said. "From something real that needed protecting from." He paused. She made a hard decision. It was the right one for the time she made it in. Adiz felt something loosen in her chest at that. Nia thought about this. "Are you going to be around now?" "If you want me to be," he said. Nia picked up a piece of fruit from the plate. "I want to think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need," he said. Nia chewed thoughtfully. "Do you know how to play any games?" "Some," he said. Nia looked at him with what was clearly a challenge assembling itself behind her eyes. "What about Uno?" Something happened in Jeho's face that Adiz had not seen before. Something warm and unguarded and entirely real. "I can learn," he said. Nia seemed to find this acceptable. She reached into her backpack, which she had carried out to the garden with purpose, and produced a worn deck of Uno cards, and began shuffling them with the practiced confidence of someone who had been winning this game since she was 5. Adiz sat back in her chair and watched the most dangerous man in Seoul receive his first Uno lesson from a 7-year-old with loose braids and her mother's eyes and his jaw. And something she had been holding for 8 years released so quietly, she almost missed it. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing about this was simple. But they were real in a way that Adiz had stopped believing things in her life could be. Jeho came to them rather than demanding they come to him. He showed up on Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings. He learned Nia's schedule and her opinions, and the specific way she required her toast, and the fact that she was afraid of large dogs, but not small ones, and would not admit to either. He sat with her homework and asked questions instead of giving answers. He was patient with a steadiness that did not waver, and Nia, who was her mother's daughter and trusted slowly, began to trust him the way you watch a wall come down, one careful brick at a time. With Adiz it was different. With Adiz it was the specific difficulty of 2 people who had already been something to each other navigating the space between what they were and what they were becoming. They were careful. They were sometimes too careful. Conversations that stopped just before the place where they should have gone. Silences that carried weight neither of them named yet. But underneath it, persistent and patient and entirely unwilling to be managed away, was the thing that had been there 8 years ago. It had not gone anywhere. It had simply been waiting. One evening in the garden, after Nia had been taken inside by Mrs. Pyo, who managed Jeho's house with quiet competence, and had taken to Nia with the warmth of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this kind of noise in these rooms, Jeho and Adiz sat alone at the outdoor table with the city lights beginning to show against the darkening sky. He said, "I am not going to pretend that I am not angry about the years." She said, "I know." He said, "I understand why. I understand the decision. I have thought about it from every angle and I understand it." He paused. "But I am still going to be angry about it for a while, and I wanted to tell you that directly rather than let it sit between us unspoken." She looked at him. "Thank you for saying it," she said. He nodded. She said, I am sorry. Not for keeping her safe, but for the 8 years. For not finding a way to trust you with the truth sooner. He was quiet. I was afraid, she said. Not just of the danger. Of you. Of what you had become. Of whether the man I had known was still inside what you had built. Is he? Jae-ho asked. She looked at him for a long moment in the evening light. Yes, she said quietly. He is. Something in the air between them changed. Not dramatically. No grand gesture. Simply the specific shift of two people who have said the true things and are now in the place the true things lead to. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over beneath his. They sat like that while the city darkened and the lights came on below them, and somewhere inside the house Nia was loudly explaining to Mrs. Pyo the correct rules of Uno, which Mrs. Pyo was pretending not to understand, because she had quickly grasped that Nia enjoyed the explaining. Nothing was resolved yet. There was still ground between them that needed time and honesty and the specific patience of people who were choosing to build something rather than simply fall into it. But the hand was there, and the hand was real. And sometimes that is how the most important things begin. Not with a declaration. Not with a perfect moment. Just with two people deciding that the distance between them is no longer something they are willing to maintain. If your heart is doing something complicated right now, you are exactly where this story wants you. Like this video, subscribe if you have not already, and tell us in the comments what you think happens next, because the final chapter of this story is going to leave you in pieces and then put you back together better. Keep watching. The last threat came on a Thursday. Not from Shin Woozing. Not from Chairman Oh, who had gone quiet after Jae-ho's communication and stayed quiet. It came from inside. From a man named Kwak Sung-min who had been with Jae-ho for 6 years, and who had been quietly in communication with a rival for 8 months, and who had decided that the woman and the child were the cleanest available pressure point. Jae-ho found out on a Wednesday night. He found out the way he found out most things, through the network of information he had spent a decade building. Through the quiet people in quiet positions who brought him the things that mattered before they became the things that could not be undone. He spent the night making decisions. By Thursday morning, 3 things had happened. Kwak Sung-min had been removed from Jae-ho's organization in a specific, permanent way that sent a message without requiring any additional words. The rival who had been paying him had received a visit from people whose presence was itself a full communication. And Adiz and Nia had been moved, quietly, and before either of them fully woke up, from their Mapogu apartment to a secure floor of a residence that Jae-ho maintained for exactly these contingencies. Adiz woke up in an unfamiliar room. For one full second, the old fear arrived. Then she heard Nia in the next room asking Mrs. Pyo something about breakfast, and the fear receded and left only a clean, hard anger in its place. She found Jae-ho in the sitting room. He was still in the clothes he had been wearing the night before. He looked like a man who had not slept and was not bothered by this. She stood in the doorway. He looked up. You moved us without telling me, she said. You were asleep, and there was not time for a full conversation, he said. I made a judgment call. You do not get to make judgment calls about where my daughter sleeps, she said. He looked at her. You are right, he said. I should have woken you. He paused. I was afraid that the time it took to explain would be time we did not have. That was my fear, not my right. I am sorry. She stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Then she walked into the room and sat down. Is it over? She asked. The immediate threat is over, he said. The wider landscape requires ongoing management. It always will. He looked at her directly. This is the life I have. I am not going to describe it as something other than what it is. I know what it is, she said. I have known what it is for 8 years. He said, I know. Then I need you to know, she said slowly, that I am not afraid of it the way I used to be. I am not the same person who ran 8 years ago. I built a life in this city largely alone, and I am still here, and Nia is safe, and I did that. She paused. What I am saying is that I am not someone who needs to be managed. I need to be included. He looked at her for a long moment. Everything I have and everything I am, he said, is available to you both. Fully. Without condition. He paused, and something crossed his face that was entirely unguarded. I would like to build something with you, Adiz. Not around you. Not for you without you. With you. If you want that. The room was quiet. Nia appeared in the doorway in her pajamas holding a piece of toast and looked between them with the expression she wore when she was assessing adult situations. Are you arguing? She asked. No, Adiz said. It looked like arguing, Nia said. It was a conversation, Jaeho said. Nia considered this. Okay, she said. Mrs. Pyo made eggs. She disappeared back toward the kitchen. Adiz looked at the empty doorway where her daughter had been. Then she looked at Jaeho. Then she did the thing she had been not doing for weeks. She let the distance go. Not all of it. Not in a single moment. But enough. She let enough of it go that when she looked at him, she was fully present in the looking, not managing anything, not calculating anything, just there. He saw it happen. He did not move toward her. He simply stayed very still the way you stay still around something you do not want to frighten, and let her come to the decision at her own pace. She said, I want that. 2 words. Said quietly, without decoration, the way she said things when she meant them completely. He exhaled once. Slow and controlled. But she saw it and knew it for what it was. The following months were not a fairy tale. They were something better than a fairy tale. They were real. Jaeho restructured parts of his organization over the course of that year in ways that his inner circle noticed but did not comment on. A gradual withdrawal from certain operations, a consolidation toward things that were more legitimate and more lasting. He did not announce this. He did not make speeches about it. He simply began building the kind of empire that a man builds when he has something specific to protect and has decided that the best protection is a different kind of power. Adiz went back to her own work with the support of resources she had not had before, the quiet kind of support, the kind that does not announce itself but simply removes obstacles. She finished the business certification she had been working toward for 2 years. She hired 2 people. She built something that was entirely hers and was proud of it in the specific way you are proud of things you built without anyone handing them to you. Nia started calling Jaeho Appa somewhere around the 4th month. She did not announce this transition. She did not ask permission. She simply called him Appa one morning over breakfast, and he stopped moving entirely for 3 full seconds, and then set his cup down very carefully and said yes. And Nia said, can we get a cat now? And he said 1 cat, and Nia said 2, and he said we will discuss this, and Nia said that means yes. And Adiz pressed her hand over her mouth at the head of the table and looked out the window and let the tears come without fighting them, because some things deserve tears. The proposal happened on an evening in late autumn in the garden of his house. It was not elaborate. It was not staged for an audience. It was exactly what Jaeho was, direct and intentional, and without any performance to it. Nia was inside doing homework. The city lights were doing what they did in autumn, something warmer and closer than in summer, and Adiz and Jaeho were sitting in the garden the way they sat in the garden now most evenings, close enough that their shoulders touched, not talking about anything in particular. He reached into his pocket and put a ring on the table between them. She looked at it. He said, I want to marry you. Not because of Nia, though Nia is everything. Because of you. Because of who you are and what you built and the way you stood in front of danger with your hands steady. Because I have loved you since 8 years ago, and I have not been able to locate a version of my future that does not have you in it. He paused. I am asking, not assuming. Adiz looked at the ring on the table. She had built walls. She had learned to run. She had raised a daughter alone and kept them both alive and built a life out of the materials available, which had not always been much. She had done all of this, and she was proud of all of this, and none of it had ever felt like enough, because underneath the architecture of her survival, the thing she had been surviving toward was this. This man. This evening. This table in this garden with the city below and her daughter inside, and a ring sitting in the space between what had been and what was being offered. She picked it up. She put it on herself. He looked at her hand. Yes, she said. He took her hand in his, the ring on her finger, and held it the way he held the things that mattered to him, with the full and steady weight of a man who did not hold things carelessly. Nia burst through the garden door 7 seconds later with the particular timing of a child who had been watching through the window. She saw the ring. She looked at Jaeho. She looked at her mother. She looked at the ring again. Finally, she said, they were married in the spring. Small. Private. The people who mattered and no one who was there to be seen by. Adiz wore something the color of deep red and carried a small bouquet of flowers that Nia had selected with enormous seriousness from 3 different florists over 2 weeks. Jaeho wore dark and stood at the front and watched her walk toward him with the expression of a man who has stopped trying to look like he is not feeling something. Nia stood between them during the ceremony, holding one hand of each, small and steady and exactly where she had decided she belonged. The officiant asked the questions, and they answered them, and outside the spring city of Seoul was doing what it did, all noise and motion and ordinary life carrying on without any awareness of the specific extraordinary thing happening in that quiet room. Afterward, Jae-ho held Adi's face in his hands and looked at her for a long moment before he kissed her. The way you look at something you spent 8 years without and are now cataloging with all your senses to make sure it is real. It was real. 6 months later, Adi stood in their bathroom in the early morning with a small white stick in her hand and looked at the result and sat down on the edge of the bath and laughed the way you laugh when something arrives that you had stopped letting yourself want. She found Jae-ho in the kitchen. He was making tea. Nia was still asleep. The morning was quiet and pale and entirely ordinary. She put the test on the counter beside him. He looked at it. He looked at her. Something crossed his face that was not the controlled, composed expression he showed the world. Something that was entirely his own. He pulled her in and held her in the kitchen in the quiet morning with his face in her hair and his arms complete around her, and outside the city was waking up, and inside that kitchen the life they had built from 8 years of distance and 4 years of hiding, and one little girl with loose braids who had sat down beside a dying man and held his hand, was continuing into its next true thing. Nia appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas at 7:15. She looked at her parents holding each other. She looked at the test on the counter. She was 7 years old, and she had her mother's eyes and her father's jaw and the particular intelligence of a child who had grown up watching the world carefully. She picked up the test. She looked at it. She looked at them. "Is this a baby?" she asked. "Yes," Adiz said. Nia set the test down with great composure. "I want a sister," she said. "We will see," Jae-ho said. "That means yes," Nia said. "That means we will see," he said. Nia looked at her mother. "It means yes," Adiz confirmed. Nia nodded once with satisfaction. "Good," she said, and opened the refrigerator to find her orange juice, because there were still ordinary Tuesday mornings even inside extraordinary lives, and she had always understood this better than anyone. And so this is where we leave them. Not at the beginning of the danger. Not in the middle of the running. Not in the difficult, patient work of building trust across the ruins of fear. We leave them here, in a kitchen in Seoul on an ordinary morning. A man and a woman who found each other twice and chose each other fully the second time. A girl with loose braids who had walked into the most dangerous room in the city and sat down without flinching, and the new life beginning quietly in the space they had made together. Some things survive everything you put them through. Some things are stronger for the distance and the silence and the years of careful hiding. Some loves do not announce themselves. They simply wait at the edge of your life until you are ready, and then they walk through the door you finally left open. And some 7-year-olds change everything, simply by staying. If this story moved something in you that needed moving, if Adi's courage and Nia's heart, and the way Jae-ho loved quietly and completely found you somewhere real, please like this video and leave a comment below. Tell us which moment hit you hardest. Tell us which scene you will not stop thinking about. Tell us if you want more stories like this one, because we make these for you, and we need to know you are here. Subscribe to Cross-World Romance Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who needs to believe that the things worth having are worth the wait. We will see you in the next one. And until then, keep making room for the things that are trying to find their way back to you. The end.